It was a day that should have been like any other. Pamela Johnson, a 35-year-old single mother from Greenville, South Carolina, had planned it all out, carefully and methodically. Drop the kids off at soccer practice, grab a coffee, and swing by Palmetto Square Mall to return a blender that had malfunctioned. The blender, a $79.99 purchase, was a waste of money to her, and Pamela, who prided herself on sticking to a strict budget, wasn't about to let that slip through her fingers. Dressed in a cozy sweater and jeans, she made her way into the mall, clutching the blender box and her receipt. Inside, the mall was teeming with weekend shoppers, families bustling with strollers, teens chattering as they filtered through the food court. Pamela, though, had her mind set on one thing. She exhaled deeply, rehearsing the return process in her head. No fuss, no drama. 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out. But the moment she stepped inside the store, something felt off. The cashier's gaze lingered just a bit too long. And then, there was a young man, perhaps in his 20s, whispering to another staff member, pointing in Pamela's direction. She brushed it off, focusing on the task at hand. Nothing to worry about. Approaching the returns counter with a smile, Pamela greeted the cashier. "Good morning, I'd like to return this blender." She slid her receipt across the counter, but the cashier hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, uncertain. The exchange should have been simple, but a moment passed before the cashier gave a stiff nod. "One moment," she muttered. Pamela's gaze drifted to the young associate once again. This time, he was lingering nearby, not helping anyone else, just watching her. Pamela moved on, choosing to browse the home appliance section while the cashier processed her return. Her kids had been asking for a waffle maker, and with her refund, maybe she could grab one. But the unease grew, gnawing at her. From the corner of her eye, Pamela saw the associate whisper again, this time to a man in a suit, the store manager, judging by the name tag. The two exchanged glances, then the manager strode off quickly toward the back of the store. Pamela tried to shake it off. "You're being paranoid," she told herself. "Just finish the return and get out of here." But the tension lingered. Minutes later, standing near the checkout counter with a waffle maker in hand, Pamela's heart skipped a beat. 2 police officers had entered the store. Their eyes found hers, and she froze. Slowly, they began to approach. "Ma'am," one of them said, his tone neither kind nor aggressive. "We need to speak with you." Pamela blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Is something wrong?" she asked, keeping her voice steady as the eyes of curious onlookers locked onto her. The officer glanced toward the manager, who had reappeared and was standing stiffly to the side. "We've been informed of a potential issue. Could you please step aside with us?" A potential issue? What could they mean? The crowd watched as whispers swirled around them, filling the air with judgment and speculation. Pamela had no idea that this moment would be the start of a day she would never forget. Her heart pounded as she carefully set the waffle maker down on a nearby shelf. The officers gestured toward a quieter corner of the store, and Pamela followed, her mind racing with questions. Shoppers paused in their tracks to watch, eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. Pamela could feel their stares, but she straightened her back, maintaining her composure. "Can you tell me what's going on?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with confusion. The older officer exchanged a glance with the manager before stepping forward. "We've received a report that you may be attempting to shoplift," he said, his voice cold and blunt. Pamela's eyes widened. "Shoplift? Are you serious?" she exclaimed, pulling out her receipt. She unfolded it quickly and showed it to them. "I just returned a blender. Look, here's the proof." The officer took the receipt, examining it carefully. Meanwhile, the manager crossed his arms, a disapproving look on his face. "Returning an item doesn't mean you're not trying to take something else," he sneered, narrowing his gaze at her. Pamela felt a rush of heat flood her cheeks. "Excuse me? I've done nothing wrong. I was looking at waffle makers. What part of that looks suspicious?" The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the rising tension. "Ma'am, this is just a precaution," he said, his tone trying to ease the situation. "We're asking you to cooperate so we can clear this up quickly." Pamela, now boiling with frustration, pulled out her phone. "Fine. Let's clear it up on record," she shot back. "I'm not going to let this slide." The manager frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, there's no need for that," he insisted. Oh, there's every need, Pamela fired back, her voice firm. I've been polite. I've shown my receipt. And yet, here we are, being accused based on what? My presence? My appearance? The older officer cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. Ma'am, do you have anything else in your possession from this store? Pamela opened her handbag slowly, deliberately turning it toward them. Go ahead, check for yourself. The crowd around them had thickened, and more phones had come out to record the scene. A woman nearby whispered to her friend, "This doesn't seem right. She's just standing her ground." Another voice chimed in, louder this time. Yeah, I saw her earlier. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Pamela could feel the support growing, but she stayed focused. You're making a scene over nothing, she said, her voice unwavering. Now, with all these people watching, maybe it's time you explain why I'm being targeted. The manager hesitated, looking down at the floor. It's protocol, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Protocol? Pamela echoed, incredulous. Does protocol include embarrassing paying customers in public? The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. One of the shoppers, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt, stepped forward. She's right, he said, his voice firm. I saw her show her receipt earlier. What's the problem here? The manager bristled but didn't respond. Pamela shot a grateful glance at the man, then turned her phone toward the officers. If this is about justice, let's make sure it's fair. You've checked my bag, you've seen my receipt, and there's no evidence of wrongdoing. Are we done here? The younger officer glanced at his partner, uncertainty flashing across his face. The older officer nodded reluctantly. You're free to go, ma'am. Pamela let out a slow breath, but she didn't move. Free to go, she repeated, her voice cutting through the silence. Not so fast. Someone here owes me an apology. The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder. All eyes were now on the manager, who looked as though he wanted to sink into the floor. Pamela's calm defiance had turned the tables. But the moment wasn't over. More voices joined in, and the situation began to spiral into something no one had anticipated. Pamela stood her ground, her phone still recording, as the crowd around her swelled. The whispers, which had once been distant, had now grown into a chorus of frustration. People weren't just watching, they were becoming part of the story. A woman, holding her toddler on her hip, called out, "This is ridiculous." She showed her receipt. Why are you still harassing her? A bold teenage girl from the back of the crowd shouted, yeah, if she was stealing, why didn't the alarms go off? You're just picking on her. Pamela looked around at the growing support, feeling a flicker of hope, but she wasn't done. Her gaze locked back on the manager. What exactly did I do to make you think I was stealing? You said this is protocol, but I've seen plenty of people return items here without getting the cops called on them. The manager stammered, looking for words, but he had none. It wasn't personal, not really. But when concerns were raised, they had to be addressed. The sharp edge in Pamela's voice caught through the murmuring crowd as she asked, and what concern exactly was raised? Her eyes locked onto the officer, her gaze intense. Did someone see me put something in my bag? Did I act suspiciously in any way? Or is this about how I look? The tension in the air thickened. The crowd, once buzzing with conversation, fell into a hush, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy blanket. The older officer shifted, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Ma'am, let's not escalate this, he stammered, but Pamela was already stepping in. Oh, I'm not escalating, she said, cutting him off. I'm asking for clarity. That's not too much to ask, is it? Suddenly, from the edge of the crowd, a voice rang out. I have video, a man called, raising his phone high. Heads turned to see a middle-aged man in a baseball cap. I was in the same aisle as her earlier, he said, stepping forward. I recorded something because I thought it was weird. One of the store employees was following her, but she wasn't doing anything except looking at waffle makers. Pamela's breath caught in her chest. Can I see that? She asked, her tone unwavering. The man nodded, his fingers tapping on the screen. The video began to play, grainy but clear enough to see. Pamela was browsing the shelves, holding up a waffle maker box, comparing it to another one. And there, in the background, was the same floor associate who had whispered to the manager earlier, lurking, watching her like a hawk. "That doesn't look suspicious to me," the man said, his voice firm. "Looks like someone shopping." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. But the manager's face turned pale, his discomfort written all over him. Yet, the story wasn't over. Another shopper, a woman in her late 30s, stepped forward. "I noticed something earlier too," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "That same associate didn't follow anyone else around the store, just her." Pamela turned her camera back toward the manager, her voice calm, but relentless. "So what now?" she asked. "You have no proof, you have witnesses calling this out for what it is, and yet I'm still standing here, being treated like a criminal. What are you going to do about that?" The manager glanced at the officers, silently pleading for a way out. But none came. The older officer, now with a softer tone, spoke up. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Pamela repeated, her words a sharp challenge. "No. This was an assumption, a wrong assumption. And now, I have to wonder, how often does this happen to people who can't stand up for themselves?" Her words hung in the air, charged with something deeper, a call to action no one dared ignore. Pamela turned her phone back to herself, addressing her viewers directly. "This is what happens when we don't speak up," she said. "But I won't let it slide. Not today." The energy of the crowd shifted again, this time, from shock to action. Pamela's words were like a spark, igniting something in the onlookers. They began sharing their own stories, and the focus of the gathering turned toward the system that had allowed this injustice to happen. The air was electric with tension. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened," an older woman near the front said, shaking her head. "I've seen them follow people like her before." A man in a business suit who had been quietly observing stepped forward. "I've shopped here for years and never been treated like this. Maybe it's time we all take a closer look at how this store operates." The manager's discomfort grew, but Pamela wasn't finished yet. "An apology isn't enough," she said, her voice steady but commanding. "I want accountability. Who made the call to involve the police? Who decided I looked suspicious enough to accuse without evidence?" The younger officer, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his tone conciliatory. "Ma'am, I think we can all agree this situation was mishandled. But it's clear you've done nothing wrong." Pamela's eyes locked onto him, her phone still recording, her resolve unshaken. "You're right. I haven't," she said. "But will there be consequences for the people who assumed otherwise? Because without accountability, this will keep happening." Her words landed like a punch, and the manager fumbled for a response. His earlier bravado had vanished, replaced with awkward hesitation. "We'll review our procedures," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Review your procedures?" Pamela arched an eyebrow, her sarcasm sharp. "That's corporate speak for sweeping this under the rug." The crowd murmured in agreement, their frustration growing louder. It was clear they were done with empty words. Then, almost as if on cue, someone from the back called out, "We should report this to corporate." Pamela nodded, a spark of determination lighting in her eyes. "Yes, we should. And while we're at it, let's make sure everyone sees this video." She paused, addressing the camera with a directness that was impossible to ignore. "Everyone watching this, don't stay silent when you see injustice. Speak up. Hold people accountable. Demand better." The video was already going viral, shared in real time as people in the crowd posted it on social media, tagging the store, calling for change. By the time Pamela left the store, flanked by strangers who had become allies in the cause, the incident had become more than just her story. It was a movement. The fallout came swiftly. Within hours, the store's corporate office issued a public apology, acknowledging the incident and promising a full investigation. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying Pamela's voice and those of the people who had rallied behind her. But Pamela wasn't finished. She filed a formal complaint with the store's parent company and began organizing a local meeting to discuss racial bias and accountability in retail spaces. Her calm determination and refusal to back down had sparked a fire. It was no longer just about her, it was about ensuring no one else would endure what she had faced. In the days that followed, Pamela's video continued to spread, sparking widespread discussions about racial bias and the need for systemic change. Messages poured in, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of humiliation and injustice. Pamela realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was a collective cry for fairness. A week later, Pamela stood before a packed community center in Greenville. People of all ages and backgrounds had gathered to hear her speak. The room buzzed with a shared sense of purpose as Pamela took a deep breath, stepping up to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice calm but firm. "What happened to me at that store wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern too many people have experienced but stayed silent about because they felt powerless. Today, that stops." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "I didn't record that video for attention. I recorded it because I knew the truth mattered. I wanted to show that standing up for yourself, no matter how difficult, can create change." Pamela shared the lessons she had learned through the ordeal, the importance of staying calm under pressure, documenting everything, and rallying support when faced with injustice. She urged the audience to do the same, not just for themselves, but for everyone. By the end of her speech, the crowd erupted into applause, many leaving inspired, vowing to take action in their own communities. Pamela knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. The incident at the mall had become a catalyst, turning her pain into purpose. As she walked off the stage, a sense of fulfillment washed over her. Her story had sparked something far greater than she could have imagined, a movement for accountability, fairness, and dignity for all. To those watching this video, she had one final message: remember this. You have a voice, and it matters. Speak up when you see something wrong. Stand together against injustice. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep this conversation going.